committee was comprised of Dan Curry, who's the chair, Steve Hurt, myself, and we've discovered just one other thing, is that if any of you, any of the future presenters have a cell phone on your body, it will create that click, click, click sound that we heard from Jake before. That's the sound of the phone pinging the tower saying, I'm here, I'm here. So you don't have a cell phone, do you, Elizabeth?
I do not.
Okay, so we should not hear that sound in the future presentations. It's all yours.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. I just wanted to start off with my thank yous. So first, starting off with thanking my thesis committee, especially Professor Dan Curry for all the help and guidance throughout this process. I'd also like to thank my family for being here today. They came all the way from Connecticut this morning, and so really got their here. And then also everybody else that helped throughout the process, all of the friends for the support and the kind words, really helped throughout this semester and the past 6 years. And so I'd like to turn it over to my thesis, Community Catalyst, Reinventing the Urban Shopping Mall. And so I'd like to take you to a building that I'm sure all of us are relatively familiar with, and that's the shopping mall. We go there to shop for whatever you need, sometimes on Christmas Eve when you need those last minute gifts. There's lots of stores all in proximity to each other. It's pretty convenient, and then some people also go there to hang out. However, in the past couple of years and into the future, the shopping mall typology is really in the decline. And so it's a pressing issue where we're seeing in the news, it seems like every month there's a new statistic and there's a new report that malls are doomed, they're dying, it's a meltdown. And so it's a really pressing issue that needs to be addressed. And so just some of the statistics, according to one report, 15% of US malls will either fail or need to be converted into another non-retail space within the next 10 years. And just between the years of 2007 and 2009, 400 of America's largest malls closed, and that's just within 2 years. So it really is a pressing issue. And so really taking these issues and thinking about why malls are failing. And so one is the inward orientation and the architecture. So everything is really composed on the inside. That's where all the activity is supposed to be funneled into, so that you buy the most from all of the different stores. And so that really cuts off malls from anything that's going on the outside. Another thing that is emerging is e-commerce. And so a lot of people are shopping online from the comfort of their own home. It's a little bit more convenient and sometimes cheaper. And then finally, the single-use nature of the building. It's really only there for shopping. There might be a food court buried somewhere within the mall, but if you don't need to go shopping, why go to this building? And so really thinking about what this thesis is proposing is reinventing this building, reinventing a building so that it becomes a multi-use and more sustainable ecosystem within, but then also converting it back to the idea that the mall is a place and it's a destination where people want to go to, and connecting it more to the outside context, especially in urban environments. And so just going back to the solution, really making it a community catalyst where it's benefiting the surrounding community rather than shutting itself off from everything outside. And so I bring you to this one particular shopping mall, which is located in Stamford, Connecticut. And so it's located in southwestern Connecticut, halfway between New Haven and New York City. It's the third largest city in the state of Connecticut with a population of about 130,000 people and growing. And so just looking at the Stamford downtown, the mall occupies a huge block within the heart of the city, and it's located right next to the I-95 corridor, and it's a few blocks away from the Stamford train station, which serves Metro North and the Amtrak routes. So really there's a lot of people that do come to Stamford and have the opportunity to do so. So this is the existing conditions of the mall. For some, it's been called fortress-like. There's really It's obviously, it fits the typology of inward orientation, not much going on the outside, and really closed off from the surrounding context. And so these are the existing anchor stores there. There's Saks Fifth Avenue, there's Macy's, and then there's Barnes & Noble and H&M. This particular one, the last one, was redone in 2007 because the mall, they recognized that they needed a better pedestrian entrance. And so looking at the spatial analysis of what's there, as I said, there's 3 anchor stores, with Macy's being the largest at almost 250,000 square feet. There's 130 smaller stores, and finally there's a central court that it acts as the gathering space within. And so looking at the existing site plan, I wanted to bring you through some of the opportunities that are present within the city. And so there are several target populations and neighborhoods within the 1 mile radius where there's a lot of people that can really serve and come to this place, especially looking at this from a pedestrian standpoint. Next, looking at the land use within Stamford, and in particular, this retail corridor that exists along Atlantic Street. And so this retail corridor exists as pretty much low-rise, 2 to 3 story buildings, traditional Main Street typology where there's retail on the ground floor and some offices or other functions above. And so really the mall, while it is a destination for people to shop, it's really shut off from this retail corridor that exists. And so finally, the public spaces that are also available in Stamford. So there's Mill River Park, there's also Columbus Park and Veterans Park, which is on the west side of the site. And so looking at, just going back to the issue and looking at how other malls have been adaptively reused into other functions. And so there's one example in Lexington, Kentucky, where it was turned into a church. There was also a department store that was turned into retail on the ground floor and office space above. And then finally, in Providence, Rhode Island, there was a mall, one of the first in the United States, that was turned into micro units on the upper floors. So there is the opportunity to readapt these spaces and rethink how they serve, what purpose they serve. And then also looking at really the importance of placemaking and how do we make a good place to go along with this building. And so I looked at several precedents, one being a local one, Bethesda Row, creating this intimate street environment where obviously there's retail, but it's also a really nice place to stay and to spend time. And also the Galleria in Milan, which I had the fortune of visiting last year during my study abroad experience. And not only is it a great place for very high-end retail, but it's also really a beacon and a place and an icon within the city of Milan. And it's where a lot of people love going to. And so finally, looking at how to create this sustainable ecosystem. And all of these different programs that will be fit into the mall respond to an initiative within Stamford that was recently drafted, which is the Innovative Stamford Initiative, which recognizes bringing more startup and new businesses and new companies to Stamford in order to really build the city and address the growing population. So first and foremost is putting in a more substantial, something more substantial than a food court. It would instead be a food market. And so in Stamford downtown right now, there is no grocery store. And so it's a really a pressing need that could be located on this site, and it would be an opportune place. Next, offering a really flexible and different places for innovative thinking and working. So that includes co-working spaces. I looked at several WeWork spaces throughout the US, maker spaces, and learning spaces. So just filling those needs, and especially creating a space that is a little bit more for learning new technologies, new skills, and excuse me, new markets to apply to the working environment. And so finally, bringing you to the mall, back to the mall, and where these interventions occur within the thesis. So there are 4 target interventions, starting with Macy's, looking at the opportunity to redevelop one part of the mall, the department store, and think about how that could be adapted and reused. Next is the Grey Rock Place streetscape, which looks pretty grim at the moment. I have up on my boards, and really create a more pedestrian-friendly environment. Next is the Veterans Park connection. So using this space as an opportunity to create that connection back to the rest of the city. And then finally, the mall. How do we redevelop this and reinvent it so that it's a greater place to go, to work, and to stay? And so this is the final thesis proposal, which I'll walk you through now. And so just looking at the existing city plan and what is proposed, I first looked at this original Main Street connection that existed before the shopping mall, but was demolished and done away with in order to put this mall up. And so reestablishing an east-west connection through the site to connect the two parts of the city, which would involve tearing down one of the department stores in order to foster this connection. Next is creating that east-west connection from the different places that exist in downtown Stamford to some of the more residential developments that occur on the east side of the part of the site. And then finally, creating that pedestrian promenade, something that really is more pedestrian-friendly, less about the cars, and really a place in Stamford that people can go to. And so looking at the change in how the building exists, creating that retail corridor on the ground floor, putting working spaces on the first and second floor where the stores were formerly, creating those learning and making spaces that connect back to the working spaces, and leaving the parking on the top of the mall. So again, the city view, and going back to how this is created and the design approach. So first, creating that ground floor connection, really bringing the retail down to the street. Next, creating residential units that bring diversity right to the site. So that involves bringing, redeveloping the upper two floors of Macy's into apartments, more loft-style apartments, and then finally adding on a mixed-use building where Veterans Park was. Next, reprogramming the interior of the mall. And then finally, creating a terminus plaza for the pedestrian promenade. And so just to walk you through the ground plan again, just to make it clear, we have this new resident mixed-use building on the west part of the site, which leads to the interior retail street. So that's closed off, or it's not closed off, but it could be closed off. It's more of an interior space. Next, there's the retail spaces that line Grey Rock Place to really animate this street. And finally, the food market, which exists on the ground floor of what was Macy's. Again, going through the floor plan, so the working spaces on the first floor and second floor, with the learning spaces, and also the residential units mixed in.
Sorry, are those all
Yes.
the pink shade, that's all retail?
Work, yes. Yeah, so the retail only exists on the ground floor. Yeah. And so then I'd like to take you through the pedestrian experience down this promenade, which can also be seen on through the perspectives on my boards.
Sorry, could you go back to
Yes.
the last screen? What the parking now is on top of these?
Yes, so the parking exists on floor 3 through 5,
On top of the one?
on top of the work, yes.
Just because you meant why them up as opposed to down, because it takes an enormous amount of energy.
Well, that's where they were.
It's existing now.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
Give her the plan here. Everybody wake up.
It's a complex building, I understand, so the parking does exist as right now on the top of the mall.
Was it a free, sorry, some of us are slow.
No, it's a,
Was the parking, why was it like that? Richard?
Yeah, really.
I mean, they,
Was there retail below it?
yes. So essentially, here, I'll go back. So this is what it exists at the moment. So there is parking on the ground level,
Oh, okay.
but there is also parking on the upper, it's like a sandwich, essentially, a parking sandwich.
There's that wiggle room.
Yes, so there's a ramp that takes you up to the top 3 floors of parking. So it's a pretty unique condition.
Well, there's probably 2 reasons why they did it, when we'll get to it later. It's probably due to lack of site to do parking as you would in
Right.
some mall.
Right.
But also the psychology of the American shopper.
Right.
We'll talk about that when we get there.
Now that we've established the parking sandwich, let's permit the presenter to complete her presentation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. All right. Back to the pedestrian experience. So we approached the building and the pedestrian promenade. This is the approach from Main Street, and you're greeted into this first little gathering space. Then you pass under this bridge threshold into the outdoor retail street. So it's like Bethesda Row. It's a more intimate environment for retail shopping and also for just to hang out and to be. Next, you enter into the mall where you have this interior retail street. And so you can access all of these stores on the ground floor, and the 2 floors of working and office space above look down into this atrium. Next, we're brought to, once you walk out of the mall from this interior street, you walk out to the Grey Rock Place Plaza, where you can cross the street into this new plaza area.
Can you point out the
Yes.
plan where that is?
This?
That one.
Right up there.
So I'm
It's
in the
right at the
beige.
building.
Right up there.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm going to, that's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at that structure.
At the structure, yeah. And then finally, looking at the Grey Rock Place streetscape and how redeveloping and redesigning this facade was very important, as right now it serves pretty much as a wall. But now the building has a lot more fenestration, and it's really brought down to the pedestrian and human scale. And so this is the proposed elevation, where it's a lot more open, inviting, and also a rhythm was really created on the facade to break up this long stretch for walking, which is in stark contrast with the wall that exists there now. And so finally, thinking of, this is standing in the plaza space and looking back at the mall, and this mall serving as a beacon of this new place that we're creating in downtown Stamford. Yes.
Go back, where am I standing? See that?
You're standing in the plaza looking at the mall.
So looking back.
What
Plaza.
happens in that pavilion?
This pavilion?
Yeah.
That's,
That's,
yes, the pavilion. So that can serve as a restaurant or some other function.
and that's existing pedestrian, that's Grey Rock Place, is that space?
Grey Rock
Beyond the
Place?
Pavilion. Beyond the pavilion, yeah, that
Yes.
space, that's already existing.
That's existing, yeah. Okay, and then finally touching on these programs that are going into the mall and just providing an idea of how these spaces could exist and be igniting and exciting. And so this could be, this is the idea of the market space, so bringing fresh produce, bringing food to downtown Stamford that's accessible, and also new restaurants. Looking at co-working space, more open and flexible space that can be adapted over time. Maker spaces that support the working spaces to be able to test theories. And finally, learning spaces to learn those new programs and new skills to bring back to work. The results. So what this thesis achieves is bringing 250 new residential units to the site. Next, it reduces some of the retail square footage down to about 400,000 square feet, but also reduces parking from the immense 4,000 parking spaces that exist there now to 2,500. So one of the reasons I kept a lot of the parking and on the top, kept it on the top, was to serve the mall and the people that exist there. And it's also tucked away and won't have to be relocated to another site within the city. So going back to the original thesis idea, this thesis achieves creating that new place within downtown Stamford, that their spot, but also thinking about how this mall can really better serve Stamford in many different ways. And so with that, I'd like to open it up for questions and comments.
This is really cool.
Thank you.
It's hard. I mean, it's not,
Yeah,
it's not a sexy design project. I mean, you know, it's not all sort of visual and everything. It's a really interesting challenge. I mean, I can't say, I mean, I commend you. I think it's fantastic.
Thank you so much.
I'm going to throw out some things just you may have already considered or you may not too. And again, sort of, it's the grocery bag for, you know, what's next. The Galleria, the one that HOK did in Texas, which I believe is the first one of those malls, urban, downtown, the struggle, a lot of the struggles and the conversation that he read was really, really, really provocative thinking then. I've only read a little bit of it, it was a long time ago, and you know, selective amnesia in my mind, I put it way back. But the reason I read about it is because I understood that Rem Koolhaas was looking at it when he did Lille.
Okay.
And you may know Lille is the combination of the channel coming across from England into France.
Yes, yes.
So he was trying to look for a new prototype for both that the train coming together and that urban, he called it a social condenser, which he was borrowing some ideas from Ginsburg in Soviet Russia.
Right.
Where you get a number of people coming together and the types of spaces that came together. Convoluted thing. But what he would, most important in his thinking, and what he came up with, he being Koolhaas's thinking, was the idea was the social condenser of that place in and of itself, and all the other things that benefited from the fact that all these people came together.
Right.
And that's the part I think you're downplaying, but I think you've got it. But I think it's downplayed in your scheme. Two parts of it. One is the facade along
Railroad Place, yeah.
which right now it's sort of urban wallpaper. And I think you can have a lot more fun with it, maybe taking an idea of breaking down the scale or individuation or sets or things like that. And the primary one of the internal street, which right now it just feels like it's the leftover space between, and it's you're racing to get from point A to B, rather than being a place in and of itself. Another one to look at is the, again, it's a Koolhaas building in Rotterdam, right on the other side of that bridge. I think it's, I don't know what they call it. It's Rot or something or other. It's a tower.
Okay.
And when you read about it, it's a typical of many of their, I think, more interesting projects, Oma's more interesting project. It's quite simple and almost deliberately ugly. It's a combination of quite vertical shafts of activity, but fundamentally the entrance area of how it all comes together becomes yet again one of these social condensers. I mention all three of them because it's something that's not often done because it's hard to commercialize. It's hard to make money off it per se.
Right.
And yet it's fundamental, I believe, to the success of everything else. So what you're trying to do is convince the developer to put their money into that spot so that everything else becomes successful. And I throw that out because I think you're going to have real fun at thinking about that and taking on some of those ideas. And again, it is really, really impressive. You know, I can't say enough good things. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was really a project that was built out, I mean, Stamford is where I am originally from, so it was a passion project, and a lot of this is problems that I really have identified myself as a user of this mall, and so I hope to bring that to this project.
Well, it comes through when it's important, especially in cases that you're passionate about,
Yeah.
you're living with it. Could you just quickly answer, so the bottom of the plan, what's going on there, and it seems you've
These
left, you've left that in place, correct?
Yes, I didn't touch that part because that was the part that was redeveloped in 2007, so that adds a little bit of access to the mall. at the moment.
So there's a way to get in there now?
There is a way to get in
But
there
you're
now.
not,
I didn't delineate
you
it,
didn't,
right?
okay, it's
Yeah.
not part
Aren't
of
you going through the anchor? Or won't you have to go through that?
No, there's, here,
Is it Saks Fifth Avenue?
there is a separate entrance through this retailer that's separate from, so there's this tower right here that offers a separate entrance from the stores into the body of the mall.
Wait, how does that separate? I'm sorry. Sorry,
But
Brian.
you've replaced that with work, right?
Yes.
Well, we can get to that
Okay.
later. I do have a question.
What's your big reveal about the parking?
Well, oh, yes, so typically, and I'm sure you probably came across this while you were looking at malls, the American malls, if you've noticed historically, they're always surrounded by a sea of parking.
Right.
And what they do with the parking is they actually warp the parking so that whatever side you're coming into the mall, you're coming in on grade. On one side, you're coming in at ground level, but then they warp it around so that you're coming in at the second level, but it looks like you're walking straight in, as opposed to like going in and going up. Because the American shoppers, unlike their European as well as their Asian counterparts, don't like climbing to go shop.
That's true.
So if you have retail on the second floor of a mall and there's no access from grade to that level, they don't survive. People in the States like to shop, and a lot of people base it on the automotive experience that we're so used to cars getting us to the front door,
Right.
walk in, buy what we need to buy, and leave. What I'm suspecting they did here was they didn't have enough site to do parking all around it,
Right.
that they did some parking on ground so you walk in, and then the other parking is being fed from top down.
Top.
So you're never going up when you park your car, which I think is quite
Exactly.
creative. I do, however, because I've done retail for my very first experiences coming out of Maryland, was doing a lot of retail. And I noticed some of the noble moves that you're trying to achieve here, which can be a little bit difficult, especially along that avenue. Because you have on the internal side of the mall, you're focusing the retail on that internal
Right.
spine, right? That people come in.
Yes.
But typically in retail, you'd have the front end where they exhibit the merchandise, and then the back side of the stores where they have storages and offices and stuff, which is going to be along that street.
Okay.
And if you do two-sided retail, they tend not to survive because you also need one checking point when people come in, otherwise people are stealing. If it's a small store, you'd have to have two checkout areas,
Oh,
which
okay.
they won't do.
Right.
So most likely the checkout area is going to be internally, and that wall, there's a reason it was a blank wall, because most of those retailers, that's where their storage
In the,
and
around
whatnot.
the edge.
Right. Now, you can try and do fake windows, as you see in that images, but you can't have it both ways. You know, because you can't have the retail on the street compete with what's on the inside, otherwise one of them will suffer. So developers are quite acute. They don't do these things by mistake. It's actually a very studied and time-tested strategy,
Right.
retail strategy that they've employed. It's unfortunate that the retail as a paradigm is dying in the U.S. I mean, the mall
Yeah.
is dying as a paradigm. But I think what you've done is actually quite creative in terms of trying to infuse life into and creating a new urban center, right?
Yeah.
First thing I was going to ask is, where's the food court? They don't have a food court. You mentioned that
It's-
central area, but it's not a food court.
Yeah, it's right now on the second floor. It's
Okay.
pretty buried within the mall. It's,
Did you look at additional programs? Like, for example, did you look at adding hotel?
I didn't actually. I looked at a couple of precedents, like the one in Tyson's Corner where they have that high-end hotel.
Right.
But there, in downtown Stamford, there are several hotels, many. And so I didn't think that it would be feasible to add
There's
a
also a lot
hotel.
of residences too.
There is.
And I think in terms of trying to create now, as the gentleman was mentioning, this sort of Lille, as a person, this sort of hotbed of different activities, live, walk, learn, make. I think that one thing that's missing from your tagline is play. Where do people go to play? Where's the cinema? Like if I'm coming here and it's a Saturday and I want to sort of go on a date, I want to go watch a movie, spend 2 hours, and then go to a restaurant and sit there, almost like sort of like this new urban paradigm that you start
Right.
seeing all over the place. And I wonder if there's room for it. Because those parking that you have, you're probably not going to need them all, because you said you're close to a metro, right? Did you say you were
To the Stanford train station.
Train station, I don't know what kind of train station, if it's sort of like a commuter or is it a commuter route? So it's not like your daily, it's not like your metro?
No.
Okay. Because I was going to say, this could actually be a TOD, a transport-oriented development, where your parking demand is less, and which allows you to then infuse it with additional program types, so make this even more richer than you have. So I think it's quite delightful. So great job.
Thank you so much.
A comment about it's on a kind of a better street in San Francisco. Market Street comes along, and there were some department stores. There was an Emporium building that was closed for a long time. They reopened it as a department store, and another one is built next to it. But where you come in the front door, they have sort of larger retails on either side of that, like Urban Outfitters or Abercrombie & Fitch, and those have doors to the outside. So that kind of enlivens a longer chunk of the street that,
So it wraps around them.
you know, well, no, it's just there's the front doors here, and then right next to it is like Urban Outfitters, and they
Oh,
have
I
a door
see,
to
I
the
see.
street and to
Okay.
the mall.
Right.
But they're kind of a big store, so they can handle those issues.
They
And
can
that
have
just,
two points.
that enlivens the street a
Yeah.
little bit more than just one door.
Restaurants do that too,
Yeah.
but you need a big anchor, you know, or you take over the public space and turn it into
Right.
space, which you could have done. Sorry.
What?
Sorry.
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 Good night.
Disregard anything I said off mic. So I'm going to, again, commend you for taking this subject on. It's so critically important. This is, I mean, you'll get the job right away having done this, because everybody's looking at this issue, and it's a critical one. I was going to offer that to look at Ponce Market in Atlanta. That's and that to me is kind of the direction.
Yes.
Unfortunately, you don't have the kind of interesting structure to start with. So you'll see a lot of urban places are looking at their, you know, leftover buildings that have interesting character and turning that into a destination place. And they weave, and retail is just like such an alchemy, and make, you know, it's temperamental. So there's going to be just this constant flow of uses in whatever you plan, but I think you were correct to focus on the placemaking, right, and the great spaces. And I think what we're hearing is ignore what's going to scrub down the structure. Just scrub it down to the structure, because the structure's going to be cool. And then focus on designing the spaces, because that's what your job's going to be in the end, as the architect.
That's true.
You know, so the entertainment piece, I think, is a programmatic piece, which will make bigger spaces for more assembly type of things. You know, and you know this really well. You know every inch of this area. Think about what you want there, and you know that's what should go there. But as the architect, you know, go to town on what you think those facades should be. Make more urban space. You know, we see people, you know, trying to do the inside out thing. Sometimes they make cafe space.
Okay.
Those third spaces that everybody wants.
Right.
Look for and find their corner, or oh, meet me at this place. So it's your little city to design.
I would, sorry, go ahead, please.
I agree with everyone. This is a really tough topic to take on, and most developers are, or where they can, are basically abandoning this. And White Flint, local example, where the except for Lord and Taylor, the whole thing is wiped out. That's right. Man, if I could shop at White Flint when I was in college, get a ride from my friend, I was there. That was the place. Of course, now I hate to shop. I avoid malls as much as possible. So I want to like this, and I want to go there because I need to shop. I need new clothes. Anyway, couple things. This new piece at the south, I guess. I'm curious why. I guess I see an opportunity where you could have really carved in and kind of connected this new. I'd like to think this is active, and you know people are there because you have a big anchor store, Barnes and Noble, yay bookstore.
So carving into the mall.
Yeah, just basically bring them together. That's what the Galleria does. Yeah, that's what the Galleria does in Milan. It connects different streets.
All four ways.
And you kind of made the Galleria a central place there.
Right.
This is a real challenge.
Yeah.
I haven't done a lot of retail like you have, but I have been in larger retail spaces in New York. Chelsea Market comes to mind, which is, have you been to Chelsea Market?
Oh, yeah.
I just wonder if this is big enough and if it's a combination of restaurants and retail.
Shops.
I like that you didn't put a whole lot of energy into the food court, because I think we just forget the food court. Just do some nice, and a mix of restaurants,
Right.
sit down and other. I think some of your placemaking, I think you struggled with maybe, because I see these spaces filled up with people, but sometimes what makes these places successful is having a place where you can go, where you're not in the middle
of people, okay.
And then, getting back to this, you mentioned the problem with shopping malls is they turn their back.
Right.
Which is unfortunately, you made the facade prettier, but you turned your back in a way. So putting a liner of trees is not going to make it a pleasant walkway. So I think really having that retail be two-sided is critical for that. Anyway.
Or cut more.
Nice, yeah, cut more.
Carve more into it,
Yeah.
yeah.
Take away space so that you get more frontage, you know?
Or you even glaze over the top of it. I mean, you're exploring it, and you're taking pictures.
You're exploring these ideas, try them. I mean,
Okay.
it could be like a 19th century French sort of passage like you find in Paris. When all of a sudden you glaze over the top and that becomes a world within. I agree. I mean, the interior street, right now, it's just everything that's gone wrong in the 60s. It's vacuous by comparison. And it's just, we haven't gotten into it as far as I'm concerned. And I think part of it might be when you take a section through it, you start thinking what's happening, maybe perhaps even in a classical building mode. There's the rusticated base, there's sort of the main part of the piano and overlay, and the top above. Or maybe you realize that you carve it back in section, and you get a facade that goes up 30 or 40 feet, and you set it back as an outdoor space.
Okay.
And then the roof sort of hovers over the top, and you go, whoa, that's kind of interesting. And it's a matter of carving and putting yourself in it and exploring it,
Right.
rather than just filling it with a bunch of graphic people, next.
Yeah.
I mean, we've all.
I understand that.
Yep, we all do.
So, thank you.
I'm particularly glad about this project because for many reasons. First of all, I remember when my first time in the United States after graduation was last century, and it was impossible to talk about recycled building. That is amazing.
Adaptive reuse.
Yeah, adaptive reuse, but also recycle in the real sense, because actually from some of the weakness of the building, like we're talking about the parking, 2-3 stories parking above. Actually, from this weakness, you transform in very incredible elevations. I don't know. Is this one the parking? It's behind this.
Yes, that's it.
This is, I think it's a really smart, brilliant idea because it gives the sense of the roof. No? So if you think about double skin facade wrapped around
onto the front of the building,
immediately transform that massive facade block in a more human scale. It's also the promenade, the street, in terms of perception, your eyes is lower and makes more friendly environment. So I think that's very smart when you transform something that is very bad originally, an opportunity to reuse, and you maintain the primary function that's very useful for the mall itself. So that's very incredible. Incredible also for developers. Think about a developer, how much
It can be kept there.
Exactly.
It doesn't have to be put somewhere else.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's very, very interesting. I love it. Also, the urban design, the access. We know that the place works, especially public space, if there are so many access. The main access that you create at the center resolve very well all the neighborhood, not just the site itself. Because before to come from one side to another side, of the neighborhood, you have to go around.
All the way around, yes.
So that's another interesting thing.
Great point. I do, however, want to ask a question. This bridge,
Yes,
I'm not sure how I feel about it.
okay.
Because you showed earlier, as part of your exploration, diagrammatically, this retail street that exists, right? This sort of like
Right.
almost medieval, sort of crenulated retail that leads you to this forecourt. And that sort of synergistic flow of that retail as it wraps with this ground retail, I think is a brilliant move that sort of wraps you into that court. But yet there's this thing that says demarcation that sort of almost blocks that thrust.
Okay.
And I wonder, and I think you're starting to handle it by sort of making it as glazed as much as possible. I think you're trying to do two things. First, you're trying to create, and I could be wrong, but you're trying to create this sort of donut of the housing prototype that surrounds that internal courtyard.
Yes, yeah.
Because dead ends and long hallways and stuff. I think it's a brilliant way. But I think there's also a way to minimize a visual blocking
Barrier.
that barrier
Yeah.
type. And it could mean just making it as glassy,
As
forget the solids on the side. So that when I'm looking this way, I'm seeing the continuity of that facade beyond into that second courtyard, which then lends credence to this retail street, main street, that then flows into the courtyard and goes to the mall.
Okay.
But I think by doing this, I'm kind of going, wait, are we supposed to be in that courtyard? Is it more private? Is this sort of like the public courtyard? And then the next one, is it much more for the residences? That's sort of that psychological.
What you're thinking, okay.
Right. But I think if you make it as transparent and seamless as possible, I think it'll be even more successful.
Open and inviting.
Right.
Yeah. It was a part of the project that I went back and forth a little bit for a little while, but I really thought that creating that connection for residences in the building
Is great.
would be great, and also creating that threshold into the retail street. But I understand how it could be a little bit off-putting.
And also, secondly, I think your whole idea, I don't know if it's being helped by that sort of leaping the street to that pavilion across the street.
Mm-hmm.
I understand you're trying to emphasize this east-west connection
Right.
into the neighborhood, but I think you start biting more than you can chew by sort of leaping, sort of like doing this, you
Going
kind of fix
across
what's
the
in your
street.
neighbor's yard.
Okay.
You can influence how they treat it by what you do and you set up on your property, and keep it at that, keep it on this side of the street. And
Okay.
hopefully, was that pavilion always there, or was it an open?
No, it's proposed.
Oh, I would actually, wouldn't put the
It's
pavilion.
actually part of, you didn't speak about it, it's part of a whole.
Yeah,
Network.
so this is,
Right.
so this is new development housing that is going in. It wasn't a part of my project since it's already
Oh, it is
being,
going to be built.
it is going to be built. It's in the process of being built right now. So this is,
I was going to
Will
say.
be there?
Encroaches on your pavilion.
Yes.
I thought you made that shape. I was gonna
oh,
say.
no. So this is another development company that's actually being built. And so I created that pavilion just to kind of like have that terminus and that endpoint.
I would actually let the thrust of your project go into the heart of theirs, without putting this pavilion.
Change their projects on construction.
I mean, rather than you put the pavilion there, just let the thrust of your east-west axis visually and physically flow into that project and influence what happens in that project rather than this, because you don't have ownership over that, right?
Right.
You can't tell what they're gonna put there.
No.
And the worst thing that you would want is for them to put something that's antithetical to your design. Like
That's
they
true.
put like a nail shop or a Bale's Bondsman or something.
You put it in all your renderings, so the developer gets the idea, will take it. And that would be the highest per square foot restaurant in Stanford,
That's true.
I agree with everything that's been said. I think it's great to take this on. My only comment would be that it would be nice to see a phasing kind of strategy. Would say, okay, what would be the kind of
First steps.
the first step, the most minimal intervention that you could make that would turn this thing around, and then maybe you don't have to replace both sides, or maybe you only replace one side.
Part of it.
Yeah, part of it. Because I think, most of these things are somewhat incremental in terms of
Thank you guys all. So this is the first thesis that I've chaired since I presented my own thesis here 18 years ago, and it certainly brings back a lot of memories. I recall the mix of joy, relief, and sense of accomplishment that I'm sure you're feeling now. It's been a real pleasure working with Elisabeth over the last year. She's from Stanford. She's very passionate about her home, and I think that's very clear. And while this project started as an investigation of typology and opportunities for reprogramming, I think Elisabeth really quickly kind of realized that there was a greater opportunity here to rectify some of the damage that was inflicted upon the urban character of Stanford when this mall was created. And she's been very committed to creating a place that reconnects instead of divides. And I think that ambition is clearly evident here in the work that she's presented here today. And after she graduates, she plans to take a trip to Paris, and then she'll be going back to work in Stanford. So she'll certainly have the opportunity to kind of reflect on this project and all she's learned here, and contribute to creating place and community in her home. So join me in congratulating Elisabeth on a project well done.